Welcome, folks, back to another episode of The Press. I'm your evocative, provocative, talkative host, the Big Kahuna, EJ, and today we're going to be rambling on about J.K. Rowling. Now, earlier I did a video about Zack Snyder, and I talked about how he uses his artistic license to change some characters, to change specifically Batman and Superman. I made the point in that video that because Warner Brothers knew who he was going into the deal, and because Warner Brothers gave him permission to do that, even if you don't like the versions, and a lot of people don't like the versions he created, at the end of the day, he's perfectly justified in saying, my version of this kills. My version of Batman kills. And there's perfectly reasonable explanations given for that stance in his works. So, as distasteful as it might be to certain people, it's perfectly rational and totally understandable why he would say that and why he would be correct. Now, originally I was not going to do... originally these were probably going to be two separate videos that I might get down to at some point, but both of them, both creators who attract a somewhat rabid fan base, managed to spark some controversy in the same week. So serendipitously, I get to do both these videos kind of back to back. So today we're talking about J.K. Rowling, or Rowling, or however you want to say it. I'm going to say it Rowling because that's how I read it. J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter franchise, is kind of famous at this point for making announcements that really have nothing to do with the plot of her books, that have no effect on the characters in any way other than adding some background fluff. Through her Twitter, she will announce that, hey, by the way, Dumbledore is gay. Hey, by the way, Hermione's black. Hey, by the way, before indoor plumbing, the wizards at this magical high school just used the floor like unhousebroken dogs. Stuff like that. Stuff that is varying from pointless to distasteful. But recently, with the release of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which is a spin-off movie based on her books, based on a guidebook, actually, based on a book about some of the magical creatures in her universe, she's kicked up a hornet's nest. Because on the one hand, you have the people... Because on the one hand, you have the people who say, hey, stop adding things, stop talking about how two of these characters had a sexual relationship, how the Gandalf character, Dumbledore, and Grindelwald, who's the villain of the new movies, stop talking about how they had a sexual relationship if you're not going to show it. On the one hand, you had people on the right saying this adds nothing to the characters, stop talking about it, we don't want to know. On the other hand, you had people on the left saying, if you're just going to say it and not show it, it's just token and you're not actually doing anything. You're just doing this for attention. And what's happening is she's essentially revising the books as she goes on her Twitter. That's what's actually occurring right now. Whenever she makes this announcement, she adds information that essentially comes across as, I wish I'd put this in the book at the time, but I didn't, so now it's part of the canon. She is using her authority as the creator of the characters to change them after the fact. Now, I'm perfectly fine with the second edition approach. Atlas is a second edition. If you bought Atlas in the first year it was available on Amazon, you have a different book to the one that's up right now, because the one that's up right now is a second edition. That's fine. What's not fine is coming in and saying, I'm going to change this, that, or the other thing for no reason. Ostensibly, it seems like there's no reason to it. It seems kind of pointless and aimless. It's also very telling, if you look at it, that she's doing whatever the hot button topic of the day is. She announced Hermione could have been black right when Black Panther was coming out. She announced Dumbledore was gay right in the mid-2000s when that was a major controversy. So she's making these announcements, and she talked about how they had a sexual relationship Dumbledore and the bad guy of the new ones, Grindelwald, how they had a sexual relationship right as the movies were coming out, and right as we're seeing this kind of profanizing of entertainment, where everybody swears, everybody has sex, everybody smokes, drinks, etc., for no reason, it seems, other than they can get away with it now. Anyway, what's happened is, rather than it feels like what she's trying to do is just earn brownie points, because she's making these announcements way later than the books came out. The books came out in the 90s, and she's putting out these announcements starting in the mid 2000s up till now. It's like a day late and a dollar short almost, but more importantly, she's just not, she's changing the world in ways that don't matter. Dumbledore's sexuality is never a subject of concern in the books, for example. No one cares what he likes because it's not important to the plot. And making that change either means that something in the plot was important to his sexuality, or that it didn't matter and that we didn't need to know. It means that she's just doing it for attention. And you might say, well, I don't think it's a political attention either. You could see it that way, because a lot of what she says kind of falls on the progressive side. It is entertaining when what she says is immediately contradicted by her books. For example, the Hermione could be black. Somebody very quickly found a picture of a passage in the book that said Hermione's white face. So either Hermione's a border collie, or she couldn't be black. But regardless, these are fairly political, but I don't think it's because she's, buying into and advocating the politics so much. I think what she's doing is trying to get attention from anyone who will look. So even this controversy about it is part of her goal, because even though people are attacking her from both sides on this, even though people on one side are saying, stop it, we don't care, and on the other side are saying, stop it, if you're not going to represent it, we don't care, what you end up with is people are talking about it. And the reason I suspect this is because she has tried to write other books. She's written a couple adult murder mysteries and that sort of thing, and they never made nearly as much of a splash as Harry Potter. She's a very good kids and preteen author. She's not so great at adult fiction, evidently. And so it seems like every time she brings this up, I would not be surprised to learn that it's because Harry Potter isn't doing so well. The Blu-ray of Fantastic Beasts came out, and she made this claim about Dumbledore and Grindelwald having sex, and going more in depth into their relationship, describing it because the DVD wasn't selling, because the movie was a flop in theaters, and it didn't bomb. I believe it did make back I believe it did make money for Warner Brothers, but it did not do well. It just succeeded. It wasn't terribly well received by fans. And critics alike. They kind of said this is acceptable, kind of mediocre, and kind of all over the place. And I would agree. I was working at a movie theater when it came out, and from what I could see, it was just very boring. There just wasn't a lot going on magic-wise. It was all dark and flat. It was different than a Zack Snyder film, where things are dark and there's a depth to them because he puts some high contrast elements. It was just all dark all the way back, and so nothing seemed impressive or magical. But anyway, I would not be surprised to discover that the reason she makes these claims and tries to make these adjustments is because she wants people to buy her books again. And there's a bit of a problem with that, because everyone who owns her books everyone who wants to own her books at this point probably owns her books. There's very few cases where she's going to sell another special boxed set of Harry Potter, unless you've got those very select kind of rabid fans that absolutely have to have everything she puts out. So the problem boils down to she's doing it because she wants attention. Fine. I think at some level every creative wants some attention. The problem arises. The reason I would say it's more okay for Zack Snyder to make his own version of Batman and Superman than it is for J.K. Rowling or Rowling. See, I say it both ways. Anyway, it's more acceptable, I'd say, for Zack Snyder to make his own versions, his own authorized versions of Batman and Superman, than it is for J.K. Rowling to change and edit her characters post-script, because Zack Snyder did his version in a full, completed form. He went out and he wrote a movie and directed a movie and produced it. Well, he didn't produce it. Christopher Nolan produced it, but he gave us a full narrative structure where these aspects actually mattered. Batman killing mattered in Dawn of Justice. Dumbledore being gay never matters in Harry Potter. And if it really mattered so much that she needs to come out and say it and make this very clear to the whole world that it was always in my head, then she needs to come back now and write a second edition of Harry Potter and release that with those pertinent facts actually meaning something and actually being in the book. Because if they are in the book and they don't mean anything, it won't be much better than just revising her book through Twitter. It boils down to Zack Snyder was willing to take his vision and put it out there unfiltered, uncensored. This is what I see superheroes like. J.K. Rowling has her world that she created, and she's coming back and saying, this is what I see it as now, after the fact, after I already created it. I either changed my mind or didn't feel that I could put this in the book when I was creating it. Either works, either is effective, either is a decent explanation, but it needs to mean something. These changes, if you look at, one of the big things of comics is like Elseworlds, where you take a known character and put them in a different situation. One of my favorites is Superman Red Sun, where Superman crashes in the Ukraine rather than in Kansas and is raised as a communist. Basically, it's a story of what would Superman be like if he was truth, justice, and the Russian way rather than truth, justice, and the American way. Fascinating book, really well done, and it has that establishment and the differences in it, the things that are changed from the original Superman story matter to the plot, whereas Dumbledore is gay doesn't matter to the plot. The other thing is she kind of goes crazy with it. Whereas with Zack Snyder, he's like, these are the things that are different. These are the way I perceive them. This is what affects the story. Everything else, I don't care. We're focusing in. She just kind of churns it out. It seems like if you were to take all the news about a writer, about authors in general, there's a 1 in 3 chance one of those articles is going to be J.K. Rowling announcing a new tidbit of information about Harry Potter that we now have to accept as canon. We now have to accept that wizards have no sense of personal hygiene as well as no common sense. But it doesn't change anything. It means nothing. This is from before indoor plumbing. This is from, England, indoor plumbing. When was it? It came and went because Romans. This is like before the 1400s. This is before the Renaissance, where you had this crap going on. It means nothing to the story. It has no impact, but she decided we all needed to know that. She decided it, and that's what it means if an author comes out and says this is a thing about the character. That means we needed to know that about the character. That means that it is important to our understanding of the work that we know that Hermione could have been a border collie. It is important to our understanding of the work that we know that Dumbledore was gay. But if you actually read the works, it doesn't change a thing. And that's the problem at the end of the day. It's not that she's making these decisions. It's not that these decisions I think are stupid. It's that these decisions are not in the official text. These decisions are being slapped out postscript in social media, not in an actual official book. So if the world ends one day and we have to go back to physical books, none of what she's said, none of what she's added to Harry Potter in the past 20 years now will be there. If the world ends, if the internet dies and all we have is physical books, we'll be stuck back with the hardcover books of the series, and everything she's added to it since then ceases to exist because she hasn't, and this is the other issue, she hasn't put in the, well, this is the first issue, she hasn't put in the work to officialize it. She hasn't put in the work to make a second edition of the books, or whatever edition she's on. She hasn't come down and said, this is the official book. Yes, there is kind of that word of God type authority even to those Twitter announcements. But again, if we don't have those available, then we could go through the world never knowing. If I didn't know that she had made these announcements on Twitter, then I could read Harry Potter, never know that Hermione could have been a border collie, never know that all the other issues, and my interpretation of the book wouldn't be changed. That's the other major issue. It's not really in the canon. Like it's technically in the canon, but it's not been recorded, and it's not impactful. So while Zack Snyder recorded his changes to the characters and they had an impact on the plot, so even though they're distasteful, and even though it's not an official, like the true version of Superman, or the true version of Batman, the comics version of Batman, his is more legitimate than an unrecorded, ineffectual change. What it boils down to is she's making these changes because she wants people to buy more books. She's just making these claims. They're not even really changes, according to her. According to her, this is just how the world has always been in her head. But she's making these claims well after the fact, and she's not putting in the effort to make them official. So they feel lackluster and silly. Regardless of where you stand politically, it's a lazy way to build a world. I've heard, on the one hand, people said, I always hear world building is not plot. Well, that's fine, but you need to have some world building to go with your plot. And she's world building after the fact. She did a good job world building. I'd say she did a very good job world building in the books. So why bother add to it? Why bother make these changes? Why not go and write some new ones? Right? Why not write a new book? Or maybe accept that you're the most successful literary figure of all time and live off your money. Just retire. But I guess not. I guess we have to keep making these changes because people are not buying Harry Potter anymore because everyone and their dog owns a copy. I don't own a copy. Don't show this to JK. Hey, did you enjoy the content? Well, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. It'll really help out the channel. Thanks.